Let's go ahead and get right into the action. Number one, which I am so excited to see on our agenda, by the way. This is great. John Nosta Unplugged. Uh, I am so excited to have John here to talk more about a number of topics that I think are going to be compelling, interesting. The cognitive covenant that you've written about has me pacing in my office this morning, John. So I'm thinking about it. And nonetheless, sir, welcome to the ITT stage. I'd love to give you the mic to chat here for a bit.
Thanks. Thanks, Josh. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm not exactly sure what we're going to talk about today. Since I'm unplugged, I think it's going to let it spiral in whatever direction. You said something very interesting right out of the box, and you said the nature of asking questions is really the basis of discovery. And Voltaire, I think, said it best by saying, "You don't judge a person by the questions by their answers, but by the questions they ask." And we know that in any sort of cognitive construct, even in, let's say, medicine, taking a good history, asking why this hurts or why you're doing that or why this happens is really fundamental. So, um, I think you're spot on there with this whole idea of cognition. How about if we take a step back and just talk about how I think we're framing up the future, the path,
Yes,
the
let's do it.
trajectory, the vector we're on here. There are a lot of simple analogies that establish this. And I'm going to go through a few of them and see if that resonates with people. The first is the cheetah. And the cheetah is amazing because it's the fastest land animal in the world until humans came along with their bicycles. And then they became the fastest land animal in the world. And what was that? That was the gear. That was the mechanical advantage. And that was a fundamental game changer that we saw the emergence of the Industrial Revolution and the very nature of the mechanical advantage. We are seeing that today in the context of cognition, that we are seeing a cognitive advantage, that the gear, the advantage that's being imparted to humanity is in essence the large language model. Now, this has also emerged in a lot of interesting ways. 50 years ago, and it's hard for me to even believe that it was about 50 years ago already, a young and inquisitive Steve Jobs went to a place called Xerox PARC in California. And he was given a tour and he saw something. He saw something that immediately changed the way he saw computing and knew that that was going to actually change the world. In fact, he went back and told Wozniak that this is going to change the world. And John Scully in a recent dinner confirmed this. So this is actually a true story. What did Steve Jobs see? He saw point and click. He saw the model of what we now call the graphical user interface, or GUI. And what that did is it showed us that we could point and we could click, that we could drag and put things in files. And that was the interface between the computer and humanity. And that was a fundamental game changer because prior to that, computing was difficult. It was a cognitive hassle. There was no unique, slippery, if you will, interface. I had to learn Fortran or COBOL or use a Carta compiler or something like that. So, what we saw there was the beginning of a fundamental transformation. I don't like to use the word inflection point, but I think it's fair to say that we are seeing that similar inflection point. And let me put one other example into context here, and that goes back to Gutenberg. Gutenberg did something um, with the printing press. He unlocked words. And while it took a few hundred years for that to catch on, and illiteracy was a encumbrance to the acceptance of books, obviously, he unlocked words. And then Google came along and the internet came along. And what did they do? They unlocked facts. And they did it in a way that was largely transactional. In other words, how much does car weigh? What's the diameter of the Earth? It was question answer, and that was very um, transactional. Then what happened is with the emergence of large language models. And what did large language models do? Well, Gutenberg unlocked words. Gutenberg unlocked words. Um, the internet and Google unlocked facts. Where are we now? Well, now the internet, and particularly large language models with their extraordinary processing capabilities, are unlocking thought. And I think that is at the heart of the transformation we're seeing now. And what Steve Jobs saw 50 years ago was the graphic with a graphical user interface. What we're seeing now is the cognitive user interface. That's how it all kind of comes together. What we're seeing is the ability to think together with AI or a large language model. And I think that fundamentally, that's where we are. The new user interface is think and do, not
Wow.
point and click, right? And that, I think that's conceptually where we are now. So think about it like the cheetah. Think about it like the Industrial Revolution. Think about it like Gutenberg. Think about it like Change the World and Steve Jobs. There's lots of ways of looking at, but in the final analysis, we are at that point where everything changes. Now, just to land this 747, the nature of innovation for the first time is such that because it competes in the context of cognition, in other words, we've always looked at innovation, and this space is about innovation. Innovation is a two-sided coin. On one side of the coin, we have the innovation, the other side, we have the obsolescence. And as long as you're okay with the obsolescence, the innovation is kind of cool, right? It's that duality. So if I need a new phone, it's because my old phone is not working, or a new phone comes along that makes my phone functionally obsolete. And it's that duality that creates the tension that moves forward, that creates the diffusion of innovation, that allows product adoption as we conventionally understand it. So it's okay for me to throw out my phone. It's okay for me to get rid of my car because I want anti-lock brakes or I want a Tesla, an electric vehicle. It's okay for me to get a new washing machine. Why? Because obsolescence has made the old thing disposable. Now, let's come into the cognitive age, right where we are now. The world is changing, right? Gutenberg, AI, all these things are moving. For the first time in history, human cognition itself is on the obsolescence chopping block. So take a breath, and I'm going to say that one more time. Human cognition is on the obsolescence chopping block. It's no longer a simple decision to say we'll throw away the old and bring in the new, because what we're throwing away is something that is so fundamentally, uniquely, and definable to humanity. So that's me unplugged. Does that make any sense?
Wow, wow, at 100%. And John, this kind of leads me to think that this transactional versus
Hmm.
relational
Yeah.
relationship that now we have with new technology, largely the Gutenberg printing press, even the gear that you
Yeah.
had said you were reluctant to say inflection point, but those types of
I think they
changes,
are. I
the
think they are,
the
Josh, right?
yeah, I think you're right on that too, and I think certainly point and click when Steve Jobs saw that he definitely utilized that
But
inflection
why?
along with many
Why?
insights to
Right? What's the why? The why is that it allowed us to talk to computers, right? It allowed
sure.
us to interface with computers. That's what GUI is. GUI was a user interface. And it's been 50 years coming, and now we've got that user interface that's based on thought or cognition.
And to the extent that this is a relationship now that's more intimate
Hmm.
than ever before, where does this lead us? I notice your thought on this cognitive covenant. Is it so
Yeah.
we don't get put out of the transaction that because it's more relational and that relationship's more intimate, that we need to figure out what that
Yeah.
is in an optimized, healthy fashion so we don't get
I think
pushed
that
to the chopping block,
this
right?
is, I mean, this is ultimately the existential question of our day, and I just want to go back, and then we can jump into the whole idea of this sort of what cognition is and where it's going. I don't like to use the word inflection point. I don't like to use the word exponential curve, even though that is the innovator's language, right? Show me an innovator's presentation who doesn't talk about exponential change. But here's the interesting thing is that the nature of change itself is changing. Change is changing. Let's unpack that a little bit, but it's important to recognize because the traditional exponential square, let's just whatever exponential you want to use, is that upward slope, that hockey stick. You with me?
Absolutely. Oh
Okay.
yeah.
Well, what we're seeing today is the nature of that curve is no longer that smooth upward slope. It's actually going straight up. Now, this is if anybody remembers the early
Hmm.
days of Chat GPT, the adoption curve, it just went straight up. And everyone said, "Oh, it's free. Oh, it's a marketing gimmick. Oh, it's an
Sure, sure.
artifact." Yes, I agree. But if you look at the nature of change, if you look at Ray Kurzweil dragon speech and voice recognition and image generation, all these curves, what we're seeing is they're no longer those exponential slopes, but a path that goes straight up. So that's not an inflection point. That's something else. Kathy Wood
Good
at
point.
ARK Invest and I have coined a phrase of super exponential growth because what we're seeing is this rapid, sudden ascension to market dominance. Rapid, instantaneous ascension to market dominance. What the hell does that even mean? Now, from a philosophical perspective, and I always like to kind of tickle the tail of the dragon and talk about philosophy. And that the philosophical construct is that you have a zero in the denominator. So what the hell does that mean? Well, slope, right, is change in y over change in x. And if you have a change in y, it goes up and up and up, but there's no change in x, you have a zero in the denominator. And anybody in grade school, they tell you can't do it. In high school, they say the equation blows up. In college, they talk about infinity. And in grad school, they talk about God. So pick pick the perspective you want to move to. But what we're seeing here is this nature of change is extraordinary. Super exponential growth. Now, the only way to put this into a practical perspective is moving out of the idea of zero in the denominator and the equation blows up, is simply put, it's AI to the power of AI. So when we talk about the exponential curve, we often see it as x squared or e to the x, right? A mathematical construct where something is raised to the power. But in this instance, the power is not numerical. The power is AI itself. So that's what we're seeing. We're seeing AI to the power of AI, the AI talking to each other. The Socratic dialogue is rich and the Platonic dialogues are great, but I believe the best dialogues of the future will be AI talking to AI and LLM talking to an LLM. And that's sort of where we are on that. Now,
So where does
mhm.
that land us in terms of our responsibility to this? I mean, do we let it just overtake us like a wave? We let that, the wall hit us, like you say, it's a vertical straight line up. Does the wall of the graph just hit us, or
Yeah,
is there
I
some
think it
way?
hits us. I think it what it does, it
Okay.
shakes us. I think it rattles us. If anything, it shakes at the very corners of of human existence. Now, I've been struggling with this personally because there's a lot of schools of thought here. Um, I'm going to be coming out in psychology today, any minute now, about what an LM looks at when it sees, quote unquote, sees an apple. What is the point of view of an LLM in the context of something as fundamental as an apple? When we see an apple, we see it in functionally three dimensions, with time perhaps as a component to that. An LLM sees it in 12,000 dimensions. I mean, what the heck does that even mean? So there are all sorts of deep philosophical aspects to this, but part of it is understanding the nature of these machines and how they think, and if it in fact impinges upon aspects of human sentience and consciousness. I would argue that it doesn't, and I'm getting a lot of pushback from very smart people about that because I don't believe these are sentient beings as many of my friends believe. I think that they are.
Where are you drawing the line there?
I'm not drawing the line. I'm going to sort of make that statement. Is
Yeah.
there a
Okay.
line to be
No, fair
drawn?
enough.
It's kind of like say, where do you draw the line for what's a good one for um advances in AI, AGI. Let's say AGI. Where do you draw the line for AGI? There is no line. You can't draw it, right? It's just the
Sure.
Supreme Court
Sure.
says I don't know pornography. I can't describe pornography, but I know when I see it. I sense that I can't define AGI, but I think I know it when I see it. And that's the same thing with sentience and consciousness. These machines have extraordinarily interesting abilities to mimic and to infer. And that pushes them into something beyond word prediction. I don't think it's fair to say that, oh, well, it was just predicting the next word. I think that is an understatement, because what they do is they're actually sculpting wisdom. They're sculpting the world of knowledge, and and this in of itself is extraordinarily complicated. You want to go down that rabbit hole for a few minutes,
Absolutely. This
and
makes
then
me
we'll.
think of, when
Uh-huh.
we have the mimic, idea,
Oh,
uh, can AIs create new things in your eyes, in your view? Are we there
yes,
already?
yes, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
They can create new
So
things.
I feel like a lot of folks are on the side where that's where they're still hanging on to this, kind of this token of their sentience, right? Is that, well, I'm capable of creating, new novel things, and an
Hmm.
AI is not. How might you debunk that, or support
Well,
one
I
side or
just
another?
think that okay, I'm going to say something that I'm going to regret, but I'll say it anyway. Okay, um, to define God in human terms is probably fundamentally wrong. Okay. Now let's put aside the religious implications here. Just this kind of God in quotes. Okay. God, I don't believe can be defined in human terms. Interestingly, one of the biblical interpretations of God creating man in His image, we're all familiar with that, right?
Yeah.
That's actually, there's another interpretation there that I find more interesting, is that God um, created man in His shadow, which
Interesting.
meant that man is a lesser dimensional reflection of a higher dimensional thing. So again, when we go back and we start talking about large language models, I think that we need to reestablish a reference frame. So when we talk about human consciousness or human knowledge or human wisdom or human learning, I think that LLMs present that in a different conceptual framework. So
Mm,
that's where I struggle. For example, um, an LLM uses language to create, let's say, tokens in the simplest of terms, and those are put through the models into the the mysterious hidden layer, and that's how they act upon that. They draw inferences and connectivity based upon the transfer of that word to the model. Now, when we think of the word apple, we think of maybe 20 to 50 linguistic creations of what that apple means. It's contextual, of course. It could be something we eat. It could be something we buy. It can be something like Apple Store. When you put the word apple into an LLM, it changes it into a completely different construct. It vectorizes the word in its linguistic navigation, if you will, and it connects this to a variety
mm,
of vectors, for lack of a better word. But what it does, it takes it and creates, let's say, 50,000 interpretations of the word apple, and that apple is it comes to life in context. So just to kind of maybe just to kind of summarize it, not I'm really not sure how to articulate this either, but when we look at an apple, we see it in three dimensions, right? Four if you include time. When an LLM looks at the word apple, it sees it in 12,000 dimensions. So take a breath and think about that. What does that even mean to see something in 12,000 dimensions? Real vector dimensions, order and magnitude. It is a construct that sort of transcends humanity in a way. So when we begin to look at these things, the game is going to change. And let's keep pushing on this a little bit, because I think it's worthy of kind of spending some time. And again, this is my hypothetical theoretical musings. It's not hard
yeah.
science, but think about knowledge. Okay, think about knowledge as it exists. Where do we find knowledge? We find it in a book, right? A book. That's a fair place to say we can find knowledge. Would you agree?
Definitely.
Okay, newspaper, website, right? But it's this. It is already fixed. It's already established. In other words, it's someone else's journey. if I want to learn to cook a souffle, and I go to the library, I go to the bookstore and buy Julia Child's Art of French Cooking, and I try to cook a souffle, I follow her path. I follow her journey. I follow her map. That's her map. That's old. It's not new. It might be validated. It might be a good way to go, but
Sure.
it's her map. When we look at a large language model, we see a field of knowledge that only takes shape when we prompt it. In other words, if I want to learn how to cook a souffle, I use an LLM, and that LLM has this ethereal sort of waveform of knowledge, right? Not defined, not collapsed. It's an ethereal thing. But I want it to teach me how to cook a souffle on the level of a 16-year-old who's never cooked before, who likes funny stories, and doesn't understand how to measure things using common kitchen instruments. That book of knowledge, that articulation of knowledge comes to me pure, never being created prior. It's the collapsing of the wave function. When we talk about the duality of light, where we can be it can be a particle or a wave. It's that collapsing. So I think the LLM does something different. That knowledge itself is no longer this fixed path. It's no longer this fixed um, network. It's a dynamic web of information, and that's fundamentally transformative. I know I'm getting way deep here, but
No, John, this is so
that,
interesting. When you said the term field of knowledge,
Mhm.
how to describe what these AIs are
There's no
essentially, it
knowledge
helped
in an
me,
AI. There's no knowledge in an AI. There's just potential. What the hell
right?
does that
That needs
even
to be
mean?
prompted. It must be prompted out
Right.
of it. And
And
there comes that responsibility, or like some
sure.
interface where we require a healthy relationship. And it's so hard to have a healthy relationship with something that might eat you. You know what I mean?
Well,
And
again, yeah, exactly. And so where does knowledge live now, Josh? Where does knowledge live? In the conventional perspective, the old worldview is that knowledge lives inside our head, right?
right.
It was in our head. It's something that we had in there. But that's changing, you know? And I think that what we're seeing now is in one direction, knowledge is actually becoming an extension. It's skilled action. Our pianist in the beginning of this, that expression of knowledge, did that exist in her head? Or did it expand beyond her to become part of a tool or part of the piano?
Mm.
So that level of sort of cognitive expansion, the extension, if you will, from cognition out to behavior is sort of one dimension. But what happens when humanity and reasoning and introspective thought becomes shared with something like an LLM, where it's no longer knowledge that exists in my head, but is shared wisdom? So maybe knowledge is actually becoming decentralized. And that's really kind of interesting because ultimately the decentralization of knowledge becomes what I call a cognitive DAO, or a decentralized um, aspect.
It's so interesting, and
Mhm.
that knowledge,
Mhm.
when it's turned into, when it's translated into action, that
Mhm.
action has an impact, whether positive or negative, on whatever person,
Yeah.
whatever system. At that point, when AIs have the ability to have more dimensions of action rather than just dimensions of analysis, is where I think we really start getting into a very strange territory. We're not there at all, right? They're in the model, they're on my computer, right? To some degree, I guess we're getting closer and closer to things like agents. But
Mhm.
is there some sort of golden barrier between us and AI in terms of what we're able to do, the actions that I'm able to take, right? The fact that I understand we have robots that are coming to life
Uh-huh.
now, but
Well,
this all is merging to make, I think, that case of the wall, the exponentiality out the window in the case of the wall, even more compelling when you have
well,
AIs that have
yeah,
drastically more capability in
but
terms of action.
there's a couple points there. Is you have to ask yourself, does it matter? And many of you might begin to learn that I like math. I think that math, particularly in the context of LLMs, is it's such an important tool in understanding this. And I'll bring up the concept of an asymptote, an asymptotic relationship where a curve gets really, 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 really close to a line, but it never crosses it. You know,
Yes.
and it's like if I were standing 10 feet away from a wall and I said I'm going to get half the distance to the wall, 5 feet, then 2.5 feet, then 1.25 feet every second. How long would it take me to get to the wall? Well, it'll take me forever, right? Because I
Right.
keep having. So I wonder if some of the capabilities, even the functional capabilities like empathy, become asymptotic. Is maybe
Sure.
maybe that line is that line, that sort of human line, and at some point I don't know if it matters. When a politician kisses a baby, or when a doctor spends a little extra time with you in the exam room, I'm not always sure that that is true empathy or contrived empathy, or to play off of AI. Maybe it's AE, maybe it's artificial empathy,
Mm.
but it still works. So it's a very, very interesting idea when you think about, well, does it cross that line? Maybe it doesn't. Maybe there is that spark of humanity that keeps it separate. But I ultimately don't know if it even matters anymore. But I think we're still building these machines. That these machines are under the dominion of humanity, of humans. And I don't subscribe to the dystopian Hollywood worldview of Terminator. I just don't. And
Mm.
it's a nice it if it bleeds, it leads. It makes for great copy. But I don't think that I think that's a real possibility. Elon Musk says it's what was it, 10% that the robots will take over, that AI will take over. But we're still engaged with them in interesting ways. And I think we just have to be mindful of that. It's funny. My daughters who are 16 don't like cutting down a tree because they grew up in a very ecocentric world. They wanted to take care of the environment. So Dad, you shouldn't cut down that tree. Well, I think that you can build AI in a human centric construct too. That AI recognizes that humanity is part and parcel of the AI experience in of itself. And ultimately, maybe AI becomes too smart to become evil in that context. And that's an hour of lecturing on that crazy stuff. But how do we bring this back into like innovation? I mean,
No,
I
I
mean,
think I think that for every mind in the room, John, there a lot of this runs in parallel and
mhm,
expands our minds as thinkers in general, as insight gatherers in the world of innovation. This all matters. I have two other things that I think are on my mind. There's a quote from you that I wanted to pull out and ask you
mhm,
about, but before we're sort of talking about capability, and we're talking about I want to talk a little bit about the diffusion of AI
yeah,
across,
mhm,
its impact across everybody. It's interesting to me to look at the rate of the increase of capability of these
mhm,
AIs
mhm,
and the rate of adoption of them, and
yeah,
seeing the capability breach a point that is very, very interesting and compelling, and it not yet reaching a point of maximal diffusion. Do you
yeah.
see these at odds with each other? Do you
Well,
what's the relationship there, if any, just from your
I
lens?
think I think fundamentally the problem is that people are forcing it to one curve. So when you talk about adoption, um, that everyone's trying to force it to one curve, you know, like
Okay.
Gartner's, and I don't think it's one curve. I think it's at least two. And let me explain what I mean by that. The adoption sequence of AI is functional and cognitive. In other words, functional AI is being adopted really quickly, like Waze, like scheduling, like optimizing travel plans. Those things, in a cohort of physicians, was up 68% last year. The confidence level of using AI in that sort of business model. However, cognitive AI was actually down in terms of the enthusiasm, was down 1% last year. So that's where the rub is, that we will be using AI for functional and practical things, but we fall into trouble because of the inherent human cognition on the obsolescence chopping block issue as I started this whole thing. So it's a little complicated because it's not a single curve. That's probably my biggest takeaway to keep the story
Sure.
simple, right?
Yeah.
Don't
Well,
use one
interesting
curve.
thought. Absolutely. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. No,
And you
thank you
had a
for sharing
quote.
that.
You had a quote or something you said. What was it? God forbid it was probably. I probably changed my mind by now.
No problem. And John, thanks for taking a moment to answer that. I want to be mindful of the time that we have you on stage. There,
Uh huh.
maybe just two things. One thing, a quote that I'd love for you to address, and then let's tie
Yes.
this back into innovation. No
Hmm.
doubt for everybody in the room. Of course, AI, that vertical, or maybe much bigger than that, that inflection point is colliding
Hmm.
with everything. And innovators at the forefront of this have an incredible opportunity. We can talk on that in a moment. There was a quote that you said. You said, "We're not looking at the devil; we're looking into a mirror." And I read that. I
Yeah.
believe that was a quote from you, John,
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
AI. Can and
Yeah.
it just kind of struck me, and I was like, the second I could talk to him, I'm going to understand what he means on this.
Well,
Please, yeah.
AI is trained on human experience, on the corpus of human knowledge and wisdom. So AI, if anything, is a mirror. AI is, in going back to that original idea of God created man in his reflection. And I think that we can say that in some ways, even though the computational power of large language models is going to surpass humanity, it's still built upon the corpus of information. So it's a mirror. So when we look at AI, we're looking at ourselves. So when we look at AI as being evil or being the devil, what is it in fact we're really looking at? So that's what I mean by that. I mean, it's a bit, maybe it's a little whimsical or philosophical,
No,
but
no. I think it's there's a couple really interesting tones in
mhm,
that and ideas in that I think
yes,
are not part of the status quo. So I very much appreciate it.
sure,
Um, John, in the lens that let's tie this back into
yeah,
innovation. Like I said, every field is gonna have this collision of this AI vertical or inflection point. Innovators in the room have an incredible opportunity to lead that, to have a healthy relationship with how they
hmm,
prompt this field of knowledge to move forward. Um, you know, I guess maybe a good question to land on is in innovators' journey, somebody who wants to
hmm,
transform an idea to impact, who is looking at this AI world and if they should go ahead and figure out how to collide the LLMs with something that they're really passionate about. Would
hmm,
you advise it right now? Would you advise
uh,
exploring that? Uh,
without question. You know, you know what the other innovator's dilemma is. There's the classic innovator's dilemma. The other innovator is, how do I deal with my partner? In other words, two guys start a company, two women start a company, and
mm,
inevitably there's issues. You know, one partner wants to do this, one partner wants to do that. There's a difference of opinion.
yeah.
It really is almost problematic. Even though I personally advocate for a dual partnership startup, I think you're better off. Um, but what AI is your partner. AI is your cognitive partner that is extraordinarily smart, that understands the way you think, and will not get into an argument with you unless, of course, you want it to. So to me, um, it's a cognitive engine that's tuned to my brain's creative frequency. And just as your partner in business doesn't subordinate you, I
Mm,
don't think AI will subordinate you. There is, as we talked about earlier, the very nature of education is so critical in today's world. We've gone, LLMs make us LLLs, lifelong learners. We must be lifelong learners because, number one, the marketplace demands us to be lifelong learners because it changes so quickly. So we have to be able to accommodate that change. So LLMs really are an essential partner. And I think that's the nature of business. It is a cognitive partner, and that's why I spend so much time talking about the cognitive age. That's the world we're in. So I don't I don't necessarily look at an LLM as a tool of opportunity. For example, let's use an LLM and develop a new I don't know, airplane navigation system.
sure.
To me, an LLM is a new partner of engagement for innovation. So that's how anybody who's not having a hot cup of coffee and a discussion with an LLM is missing the boat. I mean, these dialogues
Yes,
are
yes,
extraordinary. And here's the key takeaway, Josh. It makes me think better. It makes
yes.
me think better because now my next prompt is like, oh, that was interesting. And it just facilitates this new level of thinking. And I think it's so deep because we all have this little man in our head, this little voice, right? That voice in our head. Interestingly, that voice in our head has never changed. It's the same voice when you were 10, when you're 30, and when you're 50. It's the
Mm.
same voice. What is that voice? I don't know. But that's the internal monologue. It's a private, powerful tool that allows us to augment our thinking. What I believe large language models are providing is an internal dialogue. It's creating this new space that exists between the internal monologue, my personal cognitive domain, and the external world, the business world, the customer. But now there's a center space, and that center space is the interior dialogue that I think is achieved with a large language model. So that to me is where the magic lives.
This is so interesting, and John, it makes me think that this we're sort of reducing the latency between jumping from an idea to another idea. I think a good point of this is back in the day, even before we had centralized libraries, if you wanted to
Hmm.
know something, the
Yeah.
latency and bandwidth that you
Oh.
had to make that happen was going and traveling and maybe talking to people, and then the
Hmm.
library comes and I can surf through books in different sections. But ultimately, if I want to change ideas or topics or collide them,
Hmm.
it takes work, right? And then you had Google, which made it maybe easier. Now they're on different pages to some extent. Now with the AI, we can
Hmm.
easily jump across laterally to multitude of ideas
It,
and cross
it,
pollinate them in ways that were impossible before. And the latency on that is way down. It's not like
well,
grabbing two books off the library shelf, right?
but Josh,
It's
it's not even jumping from one to the other because we don't jump. The LLM provides a level of connectivity for
yes,
us.
wow, yeah,
And that is cognitive partnership. Yeah, yeah, we can go to the
interesting,
library and suppose I can travel on a beam of light and get to the library instantly. Who cares? I still have to find the book.
right,
I still have to look for something. I do not know what I do not know. Okay. That LLMs change that because the fact that I do not know it doesn't preclude it from the cognitive engagement of the process. That is just
right,
freaky, right?
yes,
So
absolutely,
so when I wanna search, I want to talk about using motor oil to make guacamole. You know what? The LLM is going to do it. Now,
right,
is that stupidity? Well, maybe. I like to look at it in the context of being fearless. An LLM is fearless because it pushes on on the connectivity and makes connections that were never connected. Now, a lot of
right,
people call that
right.
genius. A lot of people call that creativity. They call it artistry. Other people call it hallucinations or confabulations. So I'm not going to go down that road. But that it's cognitive connectivity, creating connections that never ever existed
Right.
ever. It's amazing, and that to me that's where I think entrepreneurs and innovators need to be. They need to be have a thinking partner. And here's the takeaway from this whole damn thing is that while most people look at AI doing things faster and better, that's just half. That's not even the big idea. Faster, better, faster, better, faster, better. Okay, but you also enjoy the ride. And when you could instill a sense of engagement and enjoyment and just joy in the process, that's what innovators seek. It's the magic that drives them forward.
Yes.
So by facilitating this level of cognitive joy, why did that happen? Well, it's like your favorite teacher. Everybody has a favorite teacher, maybe one or two, but very few people could name five of their favorite teachers, right? It's only
Mm.
one. And that person had that certain cognitive connectivity. And you know what you say? It got me, right? She got me. What does that
Mm.
even mean? She got me. What does that mean? It means that she was tuned to my brain's creative frequency because she knew I liked it hot or cold, fast, slow, high, low, smart, stupid. And
Yeah.
that's what LLMs do. LLMs automatically, through iteration, recursive dialogue tunes to you. And that's extraordinary.
Wow. John Nosta unplugged for
Okay.
more than 30 minutes here. My friend, I want to be
Cool.
mindful of your
Yeah,
time
yeah,
in
yeah. Well,
general. And
just
I mean, this is
yeah,
so much fun. If we could do this again sometime, John, you're welcome on this
sure.
ITT stage. I mean, anytime.
Josh,
We'll reach out.
Josh, you are. I appreciate how relentless you are, and that's an expression of your leadership. So that's a wonderful thing. Um, I try to set Saturdays for family. That's why I always run for the hills when you
Understood.
ask me to be on these.
Understood.
So let people connect with me. If they want to buy a subscription, they get extraordinary access to me, and they get to hear stuff like this, and get their private questions and have a dialogue. That's sort of an open channel. But follow me, send a note. I always engage with people. That's my commitment to you. If you write me something, I will most likely write back. If I don't, it just got lost in the shuffle. So try again.
John, the relentlessness can be taken two ways. So I appreciate you taking it as a note of leadership,
Sure,
my friend, and
you
well
bet.
respected that Saturdays are for the family. Thank you for making time for the ITT today. And what a incredible talk. So just have a
Sure thing.
beautiful Saturday.
All right, guys. Great. Thank you, Josh. You're doing a great job. Thank you for really bringing this to life. Take care, everybody.
You bet. Thank you, John.